Hello everyone, welcome to our second lecture in our course Listening and Speaking. Today we are going to discuss listening barriers or problems, and then we're going to discuss some solutions and strategies to overcome listening barriers. So let's start with our lecture. Now let's discuss listening barriers. Now first, what do we mean by listening barriers? Well, the word barrier means trouble or obstacle. A barrier is something that prevents you from doing something, or that it's something that makes doing another thing difficult. So listening barriers are things that make it difficult for you to listen effectively and actively. Now, I want you to imagine you are present at a public speaking event or a lecture, and that later you discover that you can't remember anything from the content of the speech of that lecture or event. Now, why you can't remember, or why you have failed to remember the content of this speech? Well, there are some suggestions. Maybe you were distracted by your own internal thoughts and you didn't fully pay attention to the lecturer. Or maybe there was some physical noise that made it difficult for you to hear everything being said. Or maybe the speaker used some technical or scientific language that you're not familiar with or you didn't understand. Or maybe you started the process of evaluation too early during the lecture, that you started to think about something said at the beginning of the lecture, and you got distracted from other things that the speaker said later. I mean that maybe you heard something at the beginning of the lecture, you started thinking about it, you lost your focus with the speaker, and so you couldn't pay full attention to the rest of the presentation. So what can you do to remember more effectively next time you are present at a public speaking event or a lecture? Well, first we're going to discuss some listening barriers that that speaker encounter, and then we're going to discuss ways to reduce these barriers. Okay? Well, the first listening barrier that we're going to talk about is low concentration. Well, what we mean by low concentration is not paying full attention to what the speaker is saying. And this obviously has an impact on effective listening. And this low concentration can be caused from various psychological or physical situations, like visual or auditory distraction, also physical discomfort, maybe inadequate volume, maybe the sound was too low for you to listen to. Maybe you don't have any interest in the subject being discussed. Maybe you're going through some stress. So whatever the reason of this low concentration is, when you don't pay full attention to a speaker, then effective communication will be greatly influenced, and obviously in a bad or negative way. Now, the second listening barrier is lack of prioritization. What we mean by lack of prioritization, we know that not paying attention to detail in a discussion or conversation badly affects our listening, right? In the same way, paying or focusing too much attention on trivial information or the least important parts in a conversation also affects our listening badly. So what's the solution here? Well, listeners here need to pick up the information that is most important to the context of the speech. They should be able to prioritize information that they listen to. This is because the information that we often listen to is delivered along with irrelevant information and non-essential information. So as listeners, we should be able to differentiate the important information from the less important one, and we can't give equal weight to everything that we hear, because this will make the listening process very difficult to us. For instance, students who take notes in a class must know which information is worth writing down and which is not, and this is decided or determined according to the context of the lecture. Obviously, writing everything down is inefficient and ineffective. Now, the third listening barrier is poor judgment. So sometimes when we listen to a speaker's message, it's common and it happens that we may ignore some parts of the conversation and we start making judgments before we receive all of the information that the speaker wants to present. And by doing this, a listener enters and gets engaged in a conversation before the speaker finishes his or her message, and the speaker forms opinions and conclusions without getting the whole picture or the full picture that the speaker wants to deliver. And of course, when this happens, listeners won't be able to make accurate critical assessments. They won't be able to assess and evaluate the message that the speaker wants to deliver. This is because they listen to one part of the conversation and then they started making conclusions and opinions on this part without paying attention to the rest of the speech. An example of this is when at the beginning of a conversation or speech, the listener hears something that arouses a specific emotion. This emotion could be anger, frustration, or anything else. And regardless of the emotion that is aroused, the listener's perception of the whole conversation will be badly affected because they'll lose interest mainly from the rest of the conversation, and they will only focus on that specific part that aroused some emotional feelings to them. Now, the fourth listening barrier is focusing on style, not substance. And by this, I mean the distractions that can take your attention away from the presentation or discussion. And of course, these distractions can influence your opinion and also can take you away from the conversation and can also badly affect your listening. For example, when you find a speaker's way of speaking to you as rude, then you're likely to not understand the message or even to not want to understand his or her message. All right? Cultural differences like in speakers' accents, vocabulary, or misunderstandings due to cultural assumptions can also badly affect the listening process. Also, the speaker's physical appearance can be a source of distraction to the listener. So to avoid this, a listener should be aware of all of these issues and should try to focus on the substance and the meaning that the speaker is trying to deliver rather than the way of delivery or the physical appearance of the speaker or anything else. Now, we've finished talking about 4 main listening barriers, and now I'm going to mention other listening barriers which may also affect your listening ability or effective listening ability. The first one is the speaker spoke too quickly. And this, I think all of you are familiar with this. Sometimes, or some speakers are just very quickly for us to follow and understand. And this can be a big or major problem when listening to someone. Another thing is that the speaker use informal language and idioms. So when we listen in a foreign language, for example, as learners of English, when you listen to informal language or idiomatic expressions that you're not familiar with, then you'll find this difficult, and then this will badly affect your listening ability. A good solution for this is trying to listen to English in informal contexts, for example, through TV shows, songs, films, and these sorts of stuff. And also, it's very good to learn idiomatic language from time to time. I mean, even when we listen to something that we don't understand, try to Google it and check the meaning of what you listen to. Also, other listening barriers may include that the vocabulary level is too high. For example, if you are a beginner English learner and you listen to a lecture addressed to intermediate or upper intermediate learners of English, then you are very likely to not understand a lot of what's going on. So it's very important to pay attention to the level of what you are listening to, and always make sure it's the appropriate level for you. Also, other listening barriers include that you assumed incorrectly that you knew what they were going to say. Yes, this happens a lot, I think, when we are engaged in a conversation or a speech, and we assume that, yes, this is what's going to happen, or this is what's going to be said, and then it's not what is actually said. So this also badly affects our listening ability. Also, the speaker might have an unfamiliar accent. We're all, I think you are all familiar with British and American accents only, but when listening to English in accents that are different from American and British English, you might find some difficulties because you're not exposed to those accents. And yes, not being familiar with an accent can cause some listening problems. Also, other listening barriers, the recording is not clear, and this also happens sometimes. If the listening or this piece of audio is not clear, it has some distractions, or there is a lot of noise in the background, then this will badly affect our listening ability. Also, the recording is not loud enough. Yes, this also happens when the recording is when the voice is too low for us to listen. So by this, we will have a listening environment, and we won't be able to hear what is being said. Another listening barrier may include that the listener may not be interested in the topic. Yes, not being interested in a topic may affect our listening ability, because sometimes we will lose focus and we'll start to daydream and to think of other things because of the loss of interest in this topic. For example, imagine you don't have any interest in topics about, let's say, space and science, and you're listening to a lecture on this topic, then you're most likely to not pay attention to a great deal of what is being said throughout this lecture. Also, not having any background knowledge about the topic can affect our listening ability. I think this point is similar to the previous one, because when you have no background or no previous or existing knowledge about a specific topic, then you're most likely to not be interested in it, or maybe find difficulty understanding some parts of it. Other reasons include being tired, and yes, that's true. If you're tired, then you won't be able to listen actively or effectively, because as we mentioned earlier, listening requires lots of focus and attention, and you have to be attentive while listening to someone, especially if you want to understand accurately and exactly what they want to deliver. Also, being hungry can affect your listening ability, because you will be your mind will be in a different place. You're just thinking about and saying, oh, when is this lecture going to end? I am so hungry, I want to eat, and stuff like this. Also, if you're nervous or stressed, then this will badly affect your listening ability, because again, this is a source of distraction, and it makes you think of things else. It makes you think of different things. It makes you lose your focus and attention with the listener, and think of other things. So we've just discussed some barriers to listening. Now you might be asking, how can we reduce these barriers, and how can we solve this problem? Well, the solution to this problem is active or effective listening. So what is active listening? Well, active listening is a communication technique or communication way where the listener provides feedback to the speaker about what the speaker has said. And the listener provides this feedback by restating or paraphrasing what the speaker said. By paraphrasing, we mean saying or repeating what the speaker said in a different way or in the listener's own words. And the aim of this repetition and paraphrasing is for the listener to make sure that he or she heard and understood what the speaker wants to say. So when you listen actively, you show the speaker that you're sincere, you're attentive, and you don't assume things that don't exist, or you don't take things for granted. And in fact, this communication technique is often used to improve personal relationships and strengthen personal relationships. It's used to reduce misunderstandings and conflicts. It also strengthens cooperation between individuals, and it also fosters understanding. Now, there are some techniques for this communication way, and these techniques are paraphrasing, clarifying, and summarizing. And we're going to discuss and explain what each of these techniques means. Now, let's discuss what we mean by each of these techniques one by one. The first one is paraphrasing, and I think that now you're familiar with this term. So paraphrasing is restating the speaker's own thought in your own words. It means saying what the speaker said or expressed in your own words. It's just like repeating what the speaker said. So you might say things like, I think you're saying that, and you state the idea in your own words. Or you can say, it sounds like you're saying, and you state what you understand. By this, you let the speaker know what you already understand or don't understand, and this will give the speaker an opportunity to clarify the things that you don't understand. Now, the second one is clarifying, which includes asking questions to make sure you understand. It's when you ask to make sure that you really understand what the speaker is saying. So you should be able to ask the speaker to clarify things when you don't understand. And at the same time, you should avoid questions that disturb or distract the speaker. And the best way to do this, asking for clarification, is to wait for the speaker to pause or to stop during his or her speech and then ask clarifying questions. It's also very important that you don't pretend that you understand. Always make sure that you ask questions to understand everything. For example, you can say something like, can you give me an example of that when you don't understand? Or you can say something like, you just said that so and so or such and such is important. Can you help me understand what that means to you? And for sure, when you ask a question, you should listen to the answer and listen to it carefully. And the last communication technique is summarizing, which is accurately and briefly summarizing and saying what the speaker said or the message that the speaker delivered. For example, you can say something like, I think the main ideas here are, or I think what you meant is. So now that we've discussed three main communication techniques to reduce listening barriers, in this section I'm going to discuss other techniques and strategies to help you improve your listening and reduce the listening barriers. Well, number one is you should be able to recognize and identify why you understand what you hear. This means that you should be able to find out which barriers are affecting your listening. And we discussed what these barriers are. It can be tiredness, it can be hunger, it can be an emotional feeling or something like low volume or lack of interest in that topic being discussed. Then after you identify the barrier, then try to reduce or eliminate this barrier. The second technique is practice listening for the gist. And the term gist is quite new to you, and later during the course, maybe next class or the following one, you'll get to know what we mean by listening for the gist. But for now and briefly, in English, listening for the gist means listening to a whole conversation in order just to get the main idea of what the speaker is trying to say without paying attention to specific details. Just getting a very general idea of the listening or the discussion. The third technique is listen for specific details such as problems, and this is the opposite of listening for gist. When we listen for specific details, we listen and we search for or look for a specific piece of information from the listening or speech. These or both of these techniques help you improve your listening ability, because in the first one, when you listen for just you practice listening to get the main idea of what you're listening to, and listening for details you practice listening very carefully to identify or pick up a piece of information that is relevant to what you're looking after. The fourth technique is listen for speaker bias, which means try to listen to find out what the speaker feels about something, or what the speaker's opinion about something, or why might the speaker have said something. Also, another technique is make assumptions and predictions. When you're about to listen to something, a speech or a presentation, try to get the background of the speech. Try to familiarize yourself with the context of what the presentation is going to be about. This also helps a lot in improving your listening ability. Another technique is listen to many different accents, and we've discussed previously that not being familiar with different accents may affect your listening ability. So if you listen to many different accents and familiarize your ear with so many different accents, then this will help you improve your listening ability and reduce the listening barriers. Also, another useful technique is listen with noise in the background. I mean, try to do this deliberately, so that you train your mind to turn out other sounds, and you train it also to be attentive yet relaxed, even though there is some background noise around you. So when you listen with this noise in the background and you get used to it, then you can reduce your listening barriers and enhance your listening ability. Also, it's very important to make eye contact with the speaker and to focus on the speaker, and to show him or her that you are following and that you're paying attention and you're interested in what he or she is talking about. Also, another technique is ignore distractions and don't daydream or think about different things when you're part of a conversation or discussion. And whenever you catch yourself thinking about something different, just refocus and get back to the conversation or speech. Also, another very helpful technique is to not think about what you're going to say next when you're listening to someone. I mean, do not try to prepare in your mind what you want to respond or say next after a speaker. Also, a very essential technique is avoid interrupting, and even when you interrupt, try to do it politely. I mean, when you have something to ask and or you have something to ask for clarification, then you do it politely. Okay, now other strategies include taking notes, as long as this doesn't distract the speaker. Okay, another strategy includes observing body language. You should be able to pay attention to the body language of the speaker, because body language in speech or presentations is the language that is not said. It's the feelings, facial expressions, postures, gestures, and other non-verbal language. It tells you a lot about the the message that the speaker wants to deliver, or how the speaker feels. Also, one last technique is try to listen to natural speech. What I mean by natural speech is real English spoken by real people, because obviously listening to recorded English from your textbook is not enough to learn English, because the natural speech has its own characteristics and features that do not exist in recorded audios. These features include number one, people link words together. In natural speech, they link words. For example, turn off would seem like turn off in natural speech. Another feature, some vowels disappear when people speak them out loud. I mean vowel like O in can I talk to you, can I talk to you, can I talk to you. Okay, it kind of disappears. Instead of saying can I talk to you, you say can I talk to you. Also, in natural speech, some sounds disappear. For example, what will he do would sound like what will he do in natural speech. Also, does he like it would sound like does he like it in natural speech. Also, one last feature is that sometimes people miss out full words in their sentences. For example, instead of saying, have you got a second, people would say, got a sec? Okay, everyone, we've reached the end of our lecture. I hope everything is clear. And if you have any questions, please write them down to ask them and discuss anything you would like to talk about in our Zoom lecture on Sunday. See you all on Sunday. Have a nice day.